All right, we are back now for the second half of celebrating heavy metal's 50th birthday. If we say that the release of Black Sabbath's debut album on February 13th, 1970 is the birth of heavy metal, and this video is about 50 heavy or hard songs that have elements of heavy metal coming from 1964 up to that. We did already a bunch in the first half. This is now the second half. We're going to continue and get up to that crucial moment when that album by Black Sabbath is released. Okay, here we go. On with it. The Attack, a British, what do they call it now, freak beat band, kind of British version of guitar rock mixed with some, not guitar, garage rock mixed with some psychedelia. John Ducan joined this band in 68, I think it was, and the sound started changing, and the track on here, Strange House, that is a really nice piece of heavy psychedelic rock. Beautiful chugging riff and just this weirdness from this era of British music. Yeah, The Attack. And of course, John Ducan later on went on to do Andromeda, which I'm going to mention, Atomic Rooster, and some other hard rock bands. Yeah, anyway, a very important person below the mainstream a little bit, but an important person in furthering heavy guitar rock. The Amboy Dukes' second album, Journey to the Center of the Mind, in 1968, also known as the American Amboy Dukes in England, because they had an Amboy Dukes band over there as well. This, of course, features Ted Nugent on guitar. Very interesting psychedelic garage rock album, Surrender to Your Kings, Flight of the Bird, Journey to the Center of the Mind, some tracks that feature some really good, heavy, aggressive guitar. I think Surrender to Your Kings is the most interesting one. It just has this power to it and darkness to it, and even something about pushing a friend off a cliff and somebody screaming. It's really cool anyway. So Surrender to Your Kings by the Amboy Dukes from 1968. Deep Purple, their first two albums, really a mixed bag of experimental, of psychedelic, of cover tunes, of early kind of progressive rock even. You could pick out a few different songs for this part or that part. I'm going to go with the song Listen, Learn, Read On from here, their second album, The Book of Taliesin, just because through and through it has the speed, it has the kind of more aggressive riffing, it has the mysterious, like the time of magic and so on, kind of lyrics, which were going to come up later on in the 70s more with like Rainbow, for example. It also features a bass solo using fuzz tone, which is pretty cool, and of course Ian Pace's drumming. Overall, I think it may not come across as being so heavy, but the elements are there. If it had been covered in 71, 72, it probably would have just sounded so much more meatier. So yeah, Listen, Learn, Read On from Deep Purple's second album in 1968. A few obscure ones that I came across here. This is from a compilation called Acid Visions, number 9. There is a band called Savannah Breeze and a track called Slave. It is an instrumental and it just has this heavy psychedelic with heavy guitar sound and the sounds of like slaves working and whips cracking and some people screaming out or whatever. It just has these elements that seem, will be incorporated into the heavy metal ethos later on. So pretty cool track there. You can find that song Savannah Breeze Slave on YouTube. That's where I heard it and managed to get it on this compilation. One track you'll find on YouTube is a song called Plastic Thunder by Bitter Creek. They call it, even there's a video even saying it's the first heavy metal song. 67. It is actually, from the best I could manage to find out, it is actually from fall 1968, but it is a heavy song. It has the galloping beat, it's got the heavy distorted guitar chords, and thunder pounding in my brain like this. That's pretty cool for 1968. I did not mention Steppenwolf, and the reason is because I just felt that their songs, although they were bluesy and guitar rock based, I felt most of them didn't really have the heaviness, and when I was considering which songs to use, Steppenwolf were put in and then eventually slipped off the list. But of course, Born to be Wild, The Ostrich, The Pusher, whatever, there's lots of cool stuff on their debut album. I just didn't feature it in here because some of these obscure bands like the Stereo Shoestring and On the Road South, a cover of a song by the Pretty Things, that's nice. Again, this kind of, ominous feeling. Something is you know, evil is in the air, fuzz tone, strong pace. The Stereo Shoestring, On the Road South. I think they only ever released one single with a B-side. You got to hear that one too. Same with Bitter Creek, only one single with a B-side. Cool stuff. I think we're going to slip over to 1969. This is an American garage rock band called The Litter. Some good stuff from their first two albums. However, their third album with a new vocalist, album called Emerge, there is some really nice proto-punk on here. As well, some of the riffing and the guitar soloing is good for proto-metal. Blue Ice is my favorite. It just has this dun 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 dun, you know, guitar riffing, and it's just really cool. Blue Ice by The Litter. You should check that out. I'm going to try to speed up a little bit here too. 31 Flavors and the Firebirds. Same band. Basically just recording stuff for the Crown Records label. I wrote all about this in detail on the Music is a Journey WordPress blog site. You can find it there. The song Distortions of Darkness is just often picked out as an example of early heavy metal. It's, yeah, distorted, it's heavy, it's an instrumental. Reminds me of the band Pelican, like Grandfathers of Pelican kind of thing. Pretty cool. That's from 1969. This is 69, this is 68. There's a kind of early version, a kind of song version of Distortions of Darkness, same or similar riffs. So some goofy stuff on here. It does sound like a band jamming with free time, so it's not like it's great, but it shows that there's someone out there doing this kind of heavy, kind of Jimi Hendrix Blue Cheer crossover type music. One song, actually two songs, that are usually not mentioned in lists of really heavy music from the late 60s is from this album here, basically just entitled More, or soundtrack for the film More. This is a Pink Floyd album. There are two tracks on here that are just completely bombastic. The Nile song and, is it Ibiza Bar? Sorry, I don't know. But anyway, both those songs are really heavy. Ibiza Bar is a bit more slower and heavy, whereas the Nile song is more almost like hardcore punkish, aggressively heavy. And again, another song that was covered by Voivod later on. If you've never heard this song before, and you're used to Pink Floyd like Dark Side of the Moon, Wish You Were Here, that kind of thing, listen to the Nile song and you won't believe it's the same band. Pretty darn incredible, very heavy track from 1969. Okay, now here's a band I actually mentioned in a previous video because I was talking about guitarist Paul Spear. This is a band originally from Idaho called Stone Garden, and they were basically considered part of the Pacific Northwest rock scene, which of course Jimi Hendrix originally emerged from. The Sonics were part of that. Stone Garden here, and this album is their only release. It is a compilation of songs done during the 60s to early 70s. And I think some of their heaviest recordings were done around 1969. And you can find, let me see here, what is it now? You can find Oceans Inside Me on the internet, and that's how I first heard about this band. But the song that I really like is Assembly Line, which I actually featured in that previous video. I think it was episode 7 or episode 8. I actually contacted Paul Spear and asked him if it was okay to use that music in the video. That is really one of those very heavy songs, full of bar chords with distortion and this kind of ominous tone to it. So pretty darn cool from Stone Garden, Assembly Line, around 1969. Of course, I have to mention Iron Butterfly one more time. And yes, everybody knows Inagata da Vida, that very famous riff and the guitar, the tone and everything. But if you've never heard Iron Butterfly's follow-up album, Ball, this is their third album from 1969, there are some tracks on here. This actually does get to be a little bit more experimental and progressive than their previous works. However, there are some tracks on here that do feature at least parts of really heavy guitar chords, soloing, and so on. But in the Time of Our Lives, the opening track, and actually the whole track itself, just has this really heavy, ominous tone to it. But the opening is just really heavy with powerful chords and descending chords getting heavier and heavier. When I first heard this, I had this on LP before. I might still have it somewhere. When I first heard this, it just blew me away. Like, wow, these guys got really heavy. If only they did a whole album like that. Anyway, In the Time of Our Lives from Iron Butterfly's 1969 album, Ball. Gotta hear the beginning of that. That's incredible. And the whole song is more or less pretty good too. Okay, so what I have here, this is Humble Pie. This is their second album, Town and Country, with bonus tracks including 8 tracks from their debut album, Safe as Yesterday. I did try to get a hold of it. I had it on standby in my Discog shopping cart, and then it was sold, and I just haven't gotten around to trying to find another copy. So I got this one, which has 8 of, I think, 10 or 11 tracks off the original album. Sadly, the song that I wanted to get the most... You know what? I forgot the name of the song. The song I wanted to get the most, which is the best representation of heavy metal off of Humble Pie's first 2 albums, is not on here. Too bad. You know what? I'm going to just check it out and put the song title down here. You'll see it in the video. The reason why Humble Pie are so important is, as I said in the video, and as many of you probably know, this was basically the band that was first labeled as heavy metal. Heavy metal, leaden shit rock was the term used by Mike Saunders, but basically that was the first time he used it to describe a style of music. He used it again in a review of Sir Lord Baltimore, and over the next few years the term just started to circulate more and more until it finally became appended to that particular style of music with loud heavy guitars and thunderous drumming and so on. Originally, Mike said that the reason why he thought about it was not so much because of the guitars, but because the drumming was just really ponderous and didn't have so many fills, didn't have all this light, intricate stuff. It was just more this boom, boom, boom. So he thought of his chemistry classes, the periodic table, and just heavy metal, leaden shit rock. So anyway, Humble Pie, and the song I told you about by printing on the screen is the one that I would pick for the heaviest or best representation of early heavy metal. 1969. Okay, then let's take a look at The Misunderstood one more time. Now, The Misunderstood, as I mentioned, they lost their singer to the Vietnam War draft. The band basically dissolved, and a year or so later, the record company, the label in the UK, contacted guitarist Glenn Campbell and said, what would you think about trying to put together a new version of Misunderstood? And so they got together with one of the former members and 2 other new people and went in to record an album. The whole recording session was just, it wasn't working out. Nobody was particularly happy. It didn't seem it was going to go anywhere. They did cut a bunch of kind of bluesy type songs, blues rock type songs. And apparently there was just one day in the studio, they were being asked to record one psychedelic type song or something like that. And the singer just basically had enough. He was just lying on the floor, didn't care. The other band members were just hanging out. And then Glenn Campbell said, okay, I'm going to play something. I have an idea. I'm going to play something. And you guys just follow along, okay? And completely impromptu, they did a song called Golden Glass. And the title and the lyrics were inspired by the singer staring at his bottle of whiskey as he lay on the floor of the studio, just pulling the microphone boom down, looking at his whiskey glass and singing. But what's really cool is the opening guitar for this. In 2 separate parts, it just has this really heavy, doomy atmosphere. Again, descending chords, getting heavier, crashing chords. It's fabulous, and it's 1969 again, so as I kind of mentioned before, I think we feel this more heavy, doomy atmosphere coming out into some songs in 1969, already appearing earlier in 67, 68. And yeah, it's coming out more frequently here in 69, before the first Black Sabbath album. So Misunderstood's Golden Glass, you can find it on YouTube. Do check it out, especially the beginning. Yeah, hey, King Crimson, In the Court of the Crimson King. While most of this album is a kind of jazz fusion, psychedelic, experimental type thing with some weird bits and so on, the opening track, 21st Century Schizoid Man, is of course a monster heavy track. Yeah, there's saxophone, there's some jazzy instrumental parts and so on, but that's fine because jazz actually does work rather well in heavy metal, it seems. So you know it, 21st Century Schizoid Man, that really heavy riff. It's been covered by Voivod, it's been covered by April Wine, and I think Ningen Isu played it live, and probably some other bands. Suck, a band out of South Africa in the early 70s, covered it. Probably lots of heavy bands have done so. So, 21st Century Schizoid Man from King Crimson's debut album in 1969. Okay, one band that I decided to throw in at the last minute at the expense of a few others. I was considering Vanilla Fudge, mentioning them one more time, Wicked Lady, UFO, MC5, 10 years after. But to keep the list to 50, it suddenly occurred to me that Fleetwood Mac has a song from 1969 that is actually a really great example of early heavy metal. And I actually have the album. I thought I had it on the shelf here, but I can't seem to see it. I probably reorganized and put it somewhere that I don't remember. But anyway, Fleetwood Mac, the song Green Manalishi with the Two-Pronged Crown, covered by Judas Priest. I first heard it on their Unleashed in the East album, thought that was a great song. The studio version doesn't seem to have the same weight behind it as the live version did. But I heard the Fleetwood Mac version and thought, wow, that's really cool. I mean, it doesn't have, of course, the late 70s guitar sound. It's not as heavy in that way, but just the riffs, more progressive riffs, and more indicative of the more progressive riffs that were going to be coming out in metal later on. And of course the writing, just when the day goes to sleep and the full moon lurks and the night is so black that the darkness cooks. Yeah, great. Very good for heavy metal lyrics, I think. And yeah, just the riffing, it's a great song. So the Green Manalishi with the Two-Pronged Crown by Fleetwood Mac, definitely a song I think should be into the proto-metal catalog there, and 1969. Okay, another band that is kind of on the edge. A band that has done some hard rock, some kind of blues, and kind of more funky rock, but who actually did do something a bit heavier in the beginning is Free, and their debut album, Tons of Sobs, in 1969. The very opening track, Over the Green Hills Part 1, is just this light acoustic track, but it goes into track 2, which segues into it. It's called Worry. There is this kind of bluesy piano, but the riffs are just really heavy. The drums are pounding, the lyrics are dark, and I think it is Free's heaviest song and a really great example for proto-metal. Again, 1969. What a pounding song that is. So, Worry by Free from their first album. This band here only ever released one album. It's a band called Valhalla, I think out of New York anyway, possibly Long Island. It's a psychedelic type album. There's a lot of variety of songs on here. Some of them do get heavier, do have some good guitar riffs. The opening track, Hard Times, that's the best, I think. And it just starts off with this dun 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 dun, and it's just straightforward, a heavy track. They do have the organ in, so a little bit like Vanilla Fudge, but doesn't matter because Uriah Heep, Deep Purple, a lot of bands from the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s did feature that Hammond organ in there with the heavy distorted guitars. So Hard Times from Valhalla. Do check that out if you can. Which way am I going here? Oh yeah, this is one of my favorites. Feudalist's Lament from Sea Shanties by the band High Tide. The guitarist and the leader of the band is Tony Hill, whom I mentioned previously on the album by The Misunderstood and the song Find the Hidden Door in late 1966. This is 1969. They had a violinist, lead violinist, playing distorted violin. Pretty interesting. A progressive band as well as a heavy band. Feudalist Lament just opens with this killer heavy riff. And the song itself is just really dark. It has like one lyric is like something about the smell of burning flesh in the air and screaming child, why do you stare? Wow, what the heck, eh? Sounds like heavy metal lyrics to me. Basically, the album is this crossover between heavy distorted guitars, proto-metal, and as well more complex songs in the progressive rock territory. They did one more album, I haven't heard it, and then after that they kind of parted ways for a while and came back doing, I think, more like world music or something very different. But check out Futilist's Lament on YouTube. Listen to that opening riff, and basically the song itself is quite good and dark, a little bit, the vocals a little bit gothic style almost. Okay, okay, let's see here. Grand Funk Railroad, 2 albums in 1969, the debut, and then, which was called On Time, and then the self-titled second album, when I think they just changed their name to Grand Funk at that point. But basically, Grand Funk Railroad. This is a compilation. I have 2 compilations of their albums. The track, I would say, the second album for me, well, the first album did have really heavy parts to it. The second album continued that, started to, I don't know, like up the heaviness and the groove as well. The song that I think just gets closest to metal is a track called Paranoid. Now, there is this distorted wah-wah pedal sound that I find gets a little bit irritating, but the song itself is dark, it's moody, it's exactly about being paranoid. The Black Sabbath Paranoid is more about manic depression, actually. But this one here is really about being paranoid, and Mark Farner does 3 guitar solos in the song, and the third one is just this really blazing metal guitar solo. Sounds really cool. Grand Funk Railroad were also one of the early bands to actually be called heavy metal, which you can find out about in the video I did about heavy metal in print in the 1970s. So, Grand Funk Railroad song Paranoid. Now here's what's interesting. Black Sabbath's album didn't come out till February 1970, but they had already been recording some songs. I think there might have been some singles released, or somehow it got out there. And this band in Peru, named Pax, managed to hear some Black Sabbath in 1969 and thought, that's great, we're gonna write a song like that. Interestingly, the song they wrote, which is called A Storyless Junkie, is a little bit closer to, probably between Black Sabbath and Uriah Heep. And a song they did a couple years later called Firefly is exactly much more like Uriah Heep. But 1969, A Storyless Junkie, probably one of the first songs to be inspired by Black Sabbath, even before they had their first album out. So from 1969, Pax out of Peru, A Storyless Junkie, nice heavy track. I mentioned John Ducan before, who later on became famous with Atomic Rooster. I mentioned him when we talked about The Attack and their song Strange House from 1968. He put together a band in 68, took some of the songs he'd already been doing with The Attack, brought them over to this band, Andromeda. What I have here is said to be the definitive collection. It's 2 CDs. One includes their original 1969 album, plus a bunch of like B-sides and extra studio tracks, plus live stuff. And it is this early heavy rock, progressive rock thing. Some of the tracks here are already going over 6 minutes. Return to Sanity is 8 minutes and 20 seconds. When to Stop is 8 minutes 32 seconds. You'll hear like acoustic bits, you'll hear kind of stretched out jam bits, you'll hear changes in the songs. Some songs, 3 songs here are done in 3 parts. But the one here, Return to Sanity, you must listen to the beginning of this, because this is exactly from Holt's Mars, Holt's The Planets, Mars. That part that has this ominous warlike riff, the drumming coming in like snare drum, building up, gradually getting stronger and stronger, heavier and heavier. And it was exactly that tritone of notes that Tony Iommi sat down. I think it was, he walked in, Geezer was playing on the bass, that dum, dum, dum. Tony sat down, plugged in the guitar, and just went dum, dum, dum. And that was the beginning of the song Black Sabbath. But you can actually hear that riff coming out here on a Return to Sanity from Andromeda, and again inspired by Mars from Holt's The Planets. So 1969, heavy stuff. Next up, I'd like to mention a rather obscure but interesting band. It's a band called Jocular out of Italy. Their first album was released in 1969, and it has basically been described as creepy organ music. And true enough, the 6 tracks that comprise the album are based mostly on this kind of big church organ style music, very kind of creepy, haunting stuff. But at least 3 of the tracks feature also this very heavy, distorted guitar. And the one that is most commonly mentioned or featured on these obscure heavy rock compilation videos that you find on YouTube, the one that is most commonly mentioned is one called Triumphatus Sad. Don't ask me what it means. I don't speak Italian or Latin. But anyway, it has a really cool riff. Now, basically, it's for the most part, it's an instrumental track. It features this heavy guitar. It features, I think, like kettle drums, and then this spooky organ. And then every once in a while, a voice comes in and says, Triumphatus Sad, or something like that. And one comment I remember hearing somebody, in response to this music, somebody said that, but this is amazing, this is 1969, this is 15 years before Bathory. So, pretty cool. Okay, that brings us up to, I think we've done 47 songs now, so we've got 3 more to go. So, for number 48, I'm going to reach back here and pull up Led Zeppelin's debut album. This one here, just like I previously said about Cream, when Cream did Fresh Cream, that was just a step into a heavier type of blues. And by the time Led Zeppelin came around with this one, they just took that step, like maybe 2 steps even further. I know Robert Plant and Jimmy Page especially really don't like to be so much associated with heavy metal, especially Robert Plant. In past interviews, he's often tried to disassociate himself from it. But there's no denying that a lot of the tracks on here, whether they're bluesy or folk-based or whatever, it's pretty darn heavy stuff. I mean, just the guitar tone and the sound and the power behind the music. Really, this is a very big step closer towards heavy metal. A lot of people will tell you Led Zeppelin is not heavy metal. I think overall they are not. However, they have done heavy songs in the past, and this is probably the best album for it. Something like Communication Breakdown, that is a speedy rocker from 1969. Good Times, Bad Times got some heavy riffs. Their version of How Many More Times is just really awesome. But the song I'm going to pick is Dazed and Confused. It is kind of spooky or eerie or has that kind of weird feeling to it until it gets into that middle part with the guitar solo, and things just speed up suddenly, and then there's this blazing guitar solo, and then it just builds and builds, and then you hear Robert Plant's voice, you know, screaming, and then the drums are coming in, and then it goes into all these chords, bah, 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 and then goes back to that kind of slow, weird, kind of creepy pace again. So I think that is just a brilliant track, and that middle part there with the guitars and stuff, it's really metal. I mean, for January 1969, come on. Okay, let's move on to the last 2 albums to talk about now. This is where it looks like we reach our goal. Here we are, February 1970, Black Sabbath debut album. The song Black Sabbath, just what it's all about. It's heavy, it has that doom atmosphere, it has those powerful chords, the drumming, the bass playing, of course, goes into that speedy section later on, the da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. Fantastic, really cool. Other great songs on here too, The Wizard, Wasp, Behind the Wall of Sleep, N.I.B. Basically, side 1 is just a really good heavy metal album. Side 2, a lot more jamming going on, a little more psychedelic still. But yeah, Black Sabbath, from the album Black Sabbath, by Black Sabbath, 1970. Now that's 49, and the reason why I'm putting it at 49 is because, chronologically speaking, this album was recorded in the fall of 1969, and there was another album that was also recorded in the fall of 1969, but it was released a little bit after this one. So we just gotta mention Deep Purple in rock. Man, did this ever get heavy. Probably the heaviest Deep Purple album ever. It was just like, let's crank up the guitars, let's hammer on the organ, put that bass, get those drums in there, get those powerful vocals in there, and what a masterpiece this is. I've seen videos of people ranking Deep Purple albums or heavy albums from the early 70s. This one, for Deep Purple, often this is mentioned as the favorite. For heavy albums of the early 70s, this is mentioned near the top. Music journalist Martin Popoff says that the first wave of heavy metal really kicks off with Black Sabbath's debut and Deep Purple in rock. 2 very different albums, both of them really heavy, aggressive guitars, just what it's all about. Of course, Deep Purple would later on move their style onwards, while Black Sabbath developed their heavy sound more. But we're going to leave it there at 50. And oh, what song am I going to pick? What song is there? Of course, Speed King is just fabulous, but it does lighten up in the middle bit a little bit, doesn't it? Living Wreck has just, oh, I don't know, what, Bloodsucker I really love. Hard Lovin' Man. It's got that dun 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 riff to it, right? And just, what song do you pick? Is it going to be Speed King? It's going to be Hard Lovin' Man? I'm going to go with Hard Lovin' Man this time. It does have the organ solo, but that organ solo is just all over the place. And really demented, crazy stuff. At the end, it's just crash, bang, boom. Wow, thunder. Okay, so there we are. 50 songs, starting all the way back from 1964 with the Kinks, leading up to early 1970 with Black Sabbath, Deep Purple. After that, 1970, 71, even 72, so many bands out there cranking out the heavy riffs, organ or 2 guitars or 1 guitar, whatever. Lots of cool stuff. Anyway, that will be for a topic in another video sometime, what happened in the early 70s, but there it is. Happy birthday to heavy metal, and there are 50 songs leading up to that birthday. So, long video. Thanks for watching both parts, and I'll be back again with another video about Ningen Isu, because I'm partway through that set. Anyway, yes, thanks for watching. See you in that other video then. Take care.